This prison guard willingly hooked up with an inmate while another prisoner recorded the whole thing. But when the video went viral, she took to Instagram to complain not about what she did, but about other people making money off her scandal.
Very, very distasteful for you to monetize or advertise yourselves as me for OF content.
Here's some female cops who went too far with drug lord inmates. May 2023, HMP Wandsworth Prison, South London. What starts off like a normal day in this high-security facility quickly turns into this scandal that shocks the nation. A 4-minute video, which is too graphic to share here, had been recorded by this inmate showing female guard, Linda de Sousa Abro, having sex with a prisoner inside this facility's walls. This wasn't a hidden camera catching an indiscretion. It was deliberately filmed for millions of viewers worldwide, leaving prison authorities scrambling to contain the biggest PR disaster they'd ever seen.
How do you husband feel? Yeah. How do your husband feel?
Linda had been working at HMP Wandsworth, a facility known for housing some of the toughest inmates in the UK. And just like every other prison guard, she was supposed to be maintaining order and keeping everyone safe. But instead, she's getting busy, breaking her professional boundaries. The video didn't stay contained for too long. It spread like wildfire, and soon everyone was talking about this female guard who'd been caught in the act. According to many sources, the inmate involved was Linton Werrich, who was doing time for breaking and entering. But what really made those jaws drop was how the prisoner recording the video proudly narrated the whole thing, announcing,
"This is how we live at Wandsworth, brah."
That single boastful line sent prison administrators into panic mode. Here we had a guard gone rogue, and it really makes you think about what happens in this place. Percy Pitzer, who'd spent years as a federal prison warden, explained why this behavior sets off major alarm bells about security.
Because if she would do that, what else would she do? Has she brought anything in? Any contraband, any drugs, any weapons? Because that's normally the next step once you compromise a staff member.
After the video went viral, Linda's reaction was nothing short of bizarre. Because instead of showing any kind of shame or some kind of remorse, she hops on Instagram to complain, not about her behavior, but about people impersonating her online.
The scandal that the entire world has somehow managed to be involved in, I have not monetized one fucking bit. At all. This is my only social media platform and I only just activated it again. So if you do come across fake profiles of me asking for money, please don't fall.
Even stranger, she seemed more upset about OF creators recreating her prison encounter than about the serious criminal charges hanging over her head.
Very, very distasteful for you to monetize or advertise yourselves as me for OF content. It does interfere with my trial. But furthermore, it is incredibly distasteful.
When investigators dug into Linda's background, they found something prison officials had completely missed during her hiring. Just a year before that scandal, Linda and her husband had appeared on a racy British TV show focused on non-monogamous relationships. Family members later told reporters that Linda had always been chasing fame, which might explain her shocking lack of judgment. This revelation had people questioning how someone with such publicly displayed values had been hired to maintain discipline in a prison setting. After that video hit the internet, Linda tried making a run for it. She called in sick and then headed straight to the airport trying to flee the country. But authorities are one step ahead, and they arrest her before she had a chance to board her flight. July 2023. Linda's formally charged with misconduct in public office. At her first court appearance, she tried hiding her face from cameras. But something shifted as the case progressed. In later appearances, she would walk in with her head held high and dressed to impress. She also seemed to enjoy her newfound notoriety. By trial time, the mountain of evidence against her was overwhelming, and she had no choice but to plead guilty.
You said that you did not believe that consequences existed for you, and did not think that you would be caught, who observed that although you felt unsupported, you enjoyed the sense of power that came with your position. Your conduct and the harm caused was immensely serious.
The timing couldn't have been worse for HMP Wandsworth. The prison was already making headlines for all the wrong reasons, including this high-profile inmate escape. Disabro's actions piled onto the growing perception that this facility was spiraling out of control.
Female officers at Wandsworth have been subject to abuse and harassment from prisoners. Female officers have reported being subject to sexual approaches and say that they have become seen as fair game. Children of your fellow female prison officers have been teased as to what their mothers do at work.
Linda now faces the very real possibility of life behind bars thanks to her actions. Most experts are saying she won't get the max sentence, but there is little doubt that she'll be trading her guard uniform for an inmate jumpsuit for years to come. For a few minutes of reckless behavior caught on camera, Linda flushed her career, freedom, and reputation down the drain, creating a scandal that will likely follow her forever. So Linda got caught filming some erotic movies. December 2019, the Fresno County Jail in California. What started as a routine investigation would soon uncover one of the most shocking scandals in this facility's history. One of their correctional officers wasn't just smuggling phones, drugs, and razor blades to an inmate. She was sleeping with him too, and didn't seem to mind when nearly a dozen inmates would get front row seats to their encounters. At just 26 years old, Miss Tina Gonzalez had worked her way into a position of authority at Fresno County Jail. And from the outside, she seemed pretty committed to maintaining order in such a chaotic environment. But beneath all that professionalism was a dirty birdie. Now, the turning point was when the Sheriff's Office Vice Unit received this anonymous tip about contraband making its way into the facility. Now, this wasn't unusual. Cell phones, drugs, and weapons are like gold behind bars, and these prisoners will do anything to get their hands on them. But the source of these items is where the story takes its first shocking turn. The tip alleged that a male inmate whose identity remains protected had been given a cell phone, which was a serious violation of jail policy. But that phone wasn't just to communicate with the outside world. It was in fact a direct line to Officer Gonzalez herself. And as investigators dug deeper, they uncovered a shocking amount of evidence. Turns out that Gonzalez had been bringing a variety of contraband, like drugs, alcohol, and even razor blades, which are strictly prohibited, because obviously these are weapons that can kill people. But the contraband smuggling would be just the beginning of her misconduct, because what investigators found next left them stunned. During her time at this place, Gonzalez would begin an intimate relationship with that same inmate, thereby crossing the most basic sense of officer-inmate boundary. The supply closets became their regular love nest. It's not just for storing mops and cleaning supplies. We had forbidden rendezvous. And this wasn't just a one-time mistake either, because Gonzalez was doing this for months, getting bolder each time like she was untouchable. And she really put in the work to make it happen. Gonzalez went as far as to cut a hole in her uniform to make these encounters a little bit more convenient. And just when you think that it's only 2 people involved, we have 11 other prisoners watching in on the whole show. And when the hammer finally came down and investigators confronted her with all this evidence, there was no wiggling out of this one. The evidence was overwhelming, and Gonzalez had no choice but to admit to everything. April 2019, Gonzalez stands before a judge pleading no contest to a laundry list of charges, including sexual activity with an inmate, smuggling drugs and alcohol into the jail, and providing a cell phone to an inmate. And just like that, her career in corrections goes up in flames, along with whatever reputation she had left. And at the end of the day, it looks like she didn't even care. During her sentencing, her former supervisor noted that she seemed to show very little regret for her actions, and sort of appeared to enjoy the attention that the scandal brought her.
Cutting a hole in your pants to make it easier to have sex with an inmate and having intercourse in full view of 11 other inmates is something only a depraved mind can come up with.
That's when it became apparent that this wasn't a momentary lapse in judgment. While Gonzalez's attorney argued that personal problems and failed relationships had contributed to her poor decision-making, Judge Michael Idgert wasn't swayed.
I think what you did was terrible, stupid. You've ruined your career. You endangered your fellow officers.
In June 2021, Gonzalez was given 210 days in county jail. Now, this wasn't the max possible punishment, and that's probably because Gonzalez had no prior run-ins with the law.
But I also believe that people can redeem themselves. You got the rest of your life to prove that.
The aftermath of this scandal extended beyond Gonzalez. The Fresno County Jail implemented stricter monitoring protocols for staff-inmate interactions, aiming to prevent similar misconduct in the future. And after completing her sentence, Gonzalez began modeling on Instagram, eventually gaining over 20,000 followers. Now, Tina went above and beyond to cross every boundary imaginable, but at least she didn't allow any of it to be recorded. The same thing can't be said about this next person on the list, though. January 28th, 2023, Fulton County Jail, Georgia. What starts as a routine shakedown in this max security wing quickly turns into a scandal that rocks the entire facility to its core.
Am I shocked by it? No. Am I disappointed? Am I frustrated? Yes.
Now, the guards are doing their sweeps for contraband, pretty standard. But on this day, officers hit the jackpot, discovering a stash of weapons, various contraband, and multiple phones. It's a good haul by any standard, but nobody expected what they'd find when they started going through those confiscated phones. One video in particular stopped this investigation in its tracks. There on the screen was one of their own, 36-year-old officer Kowana Jenkins, in a very compromising position that would soon destroy her entire career. Now, Jenkins had been with the Fulton County detention system for years, and she built quite a reputation during that time as a dependable member of its staff. Her colleagues knew her as highly professional and committed to maintaining order in one of Georgia's most challenging facilities, and her superiors trusted her with significant responsibilities, never suspecting what was happening right behind their backs. Now, the infamous video shows Miss Jenkins seated in a chair, being filmed by an inmate. What happens next leaves little room for interpretation. Here she can be clearly seen performing an intimate act with a prisoner. The footage, though brief, was unmistakable and impossible to explain away. But as the investigators dug deeper, the story got even more disturbing. This wasn't a momentary lapse in judgment or a one-time mistake. Jenkins had been manipulating schedules and security protocols to create opportunities for these meetings, and evidence showed that she'd been providing the inmate with prohibited items, creating potentially dangerous situations for other staff members and inmates alike. But in a place where security and boundaries are pretty clear between the staff and inmates, Jenkins couldn't care less. And when confronted with the evidence, she couldn't talk her way out of this one. The video spoke for itself, and it was pretty much impossible to deny. For Fulton County Sheriff Pat Labatt, this case represents everything that shouldn't happen in a prison.
The actions of this one individual are certainly not a reflection of the men and women of the Fulton County Sheriff's Office.
Jenkins was immediately fired and arrested on multiple serious charges, which included improper sexual contact, violation of oath, reckless conduct, cruelty to inmates, as well as providing prohibited items without authorization. But what makes all this troubling is that this wasn't an isolated incident at this prison. Fulton County had already been dealing with several security breaches. The place has been embarrassed by a 2023 video showing inmates recording a rap session inside the jail, with a security door visibly left wide open and an officer watching without interfering. It's stuff like this that has a really troubling pattern of security failures, raising serious questions about the management of the prison. Okay, so Kowana just couldn't resist that dude's finger. But this next officer went even further by printing explicit photos at work and then handing them over to teenage inmates. January 25th, 2020, Weatherby Young Offender Institution, Yorkshire. Prison life was carrying on as usual, but 25-year-old Jordan Traynor was sitting on a ticking time bomb that was about to blow her entire life apart. To her colleagues, Traynor looked like the dedicated officer. She packed up her life in 2018 and relocated to Yorkshire from London so that her husband could advance his career. But behind that uniform was a woman on edge. The city of Yorkshire didn't exactly roll out the welcome mat for Traynor. Her London accent kind of stuck out like a sore thumb. making her an easy target for unkind jokes in a workplace where having your team's back was really important. Speaking of having her back, her husband was nowhere to be found, emotionally. He disappeared into this 2-week training course, leaving her stranded in a place where she knew absolutely nobody. And this was a recipe for disaster. Trainer's marriage is now falling apart. Her co-workers are treating her like an outsider, and she drinks that loneliness straight out of a bottle. But alcohol wouldn't be the only thing trying to fill a void. She found another outlet that would prove catastrophic. Trainer starts confiding in 2 young inmates. Now, these inmates became her emotional support system, the ones who would listen when the rest of her world seemed to have tuned her out. Pretty soon, though, those prison walls weren't the only boundaries being crossed. What starts like inappropriate text messaging to one of the teens quickly spirals into something far more inappropriate. Trainer starts with the pics, and then she actually prints them out at work and hand-delivers them to the teen's cell. If that wasn't risky enough, she would also smuggle in contraband for one of the boys when he asked her to. Her later defense that
They look like phones, but I don't know what was inside
fell completely flat with prosecutors. They knew she was fully aware she was bringing in contraband that would have thrown the whole facility into chaos. But one relationship wouldn't be enough of an adrenaline rush for Trainer, and before long she had a second young inmate on the receiving end of those explicit texts and pictures. This relationship crossed into physical territory too, with the teen reportedly getting hands-on with the officer on multiple occasions. Trainer juggled the double life for months, growing more confident with each passing day that she'd somehow beaten the system. But she made a rookie mistake, and that's forgetting that in a correctional facility, secrets have a short shelf life, and someone's always watching. December 23, 2019. Rumors about a female officer getting too close to inmates start making the rounds. Prison officials waste no time in ordering a thorough search of both teen cells. And that's when they found the cell phones loaded with evidence that led straight back to Trainer. The evidence was overwhelming. Trainer had to come clean, and her subsequent guilty plea to misconduct in public office was almost a formality at that point. But here's another twist for you. Trainer wasn't just a married corrections officer crossing every professional line in the book. She was also pregnant. The very circumstances that should have kept her on the straight and narrow instead seemed to only push her deeper into self-destructive behavior. At Leeds Crown Court, her defense team worked overtime, painting her as this vulnerable woman, neglected by her husband and bullied by her colleagues, who simply found comfort in the only people who showed her any kindness. But the court wasn't buying that crap, adding that,
The court has heard you engaged in flirtatious behavior with these inmates, which clearly you enjoyed.
January 2021. The hammer came down. 18 months behind bars. The judge acknowledged her personal problems, but made one thing crystal clear. Betraying a position of trust, especially with vulnerable young offenders, comes with consequences. Trainer's fall from grace shows how quickly things can go south when professional boundaries get blurred. Her search for emotional connection cost her everything: her career, freedom, and any chance of normalcy afterward. Jordan Trainer used a prison printer for explicit photography, but our next officer would use an Apple Watch to orchestrate a desperate cover-up. January 2019. Adobe Mountain School, Phoenix, Arizona. What was supposed to be a secure place for troubled kids turning their lives around was about to become ground zero for a scandal that nobody saw coming. Amari Waller had just started her new job as a corrections officer at this juvie detention center, and at 25 years old, she seemed like a promising addition to the team. On paper, everything looked great. She was helping with daily activities, ensuring safety, and supporting rehabilitation programs for these young offenders. The kind of work that actually makes a difference in society. But beneath all of that, Waller was harboring desires that would eventually blow up her entire career. The first red flag showed up when one of her coworkers spotted something they definitely weren't supposed to see. Some dirty Snapchat messages between Waller and an 18-year-old who had been recently released from the facility. This wasn't just unprofessional, it was potentially criminal. The whistleblower didn't hesitate. They reported what they found, and just like that, the investigation was on. And as these authorities would dig deeper, the story only got worse. It turns out Waller had been getting cozy with this young guy while he was still locked up. And when he got out on parole in November, their relationship quickly turned physical. Even though he wasn't in juvie anymore, he was still under department supervision, which meant that any kind of contact with him was crossing a major legal line. The investigation takes a powerful turn when they search this young man's room. What they discovered was the digital equivalent of catching someone red-handed. His phone contained explicit photos and videos that left absolutely nothing to the imagination. Clear evidence showing both Waller and this former inmate together in ways that shattered any remaining doubt about the nature of their relationship. Investigators then seized Waller's phone, and sure enough, the same explicit material was right there. The matching digital trails painted a crystal clear picture of an officer who had completely abandoned her professional responsibilities. When confronted with the mounting evidence, Waller had nothing to say. She tells investigators that it's all true, which confirmed all the evidence presented. But then it takes an even more bizarre turn, just when you think Waller couldn't dig any deeper. During this interview with investigators, Waller had smuggled in this Apple Watch, which in and of itself is a violation of contraband rules. But when she goes for a bathroom break during questioning, she uses those private moments to text the inmate, urging him to deny and delete any form of evidence. So instead of owning up to her mistakes, Waller was now trying to cover her tracks and to get the young man to lie for her. The fallout was quick and hard. Waller was arrested and hit with unlawful sexual conduct, smuggling contraband into a juvenile facility, as well as tampering with evidence. Each of these charges carries a serious penalty, reflecting just how seriously the authorities were taking her violations. Meanwhile, the Arizona Department of Juvie Corrections didn't waste any time distancing themselves from her. They suspended her immediately without pay on May 21st, whilst the investigation continued. The suspension quickly became a termination, and just like that, her career in Juvie Corrections was over before it really began. Amari Waller tried using technology to hide her tracks, but our next case couldn't escape the hidden camera installed in her favorite meeting spot. December 2018, HMP Birmingham, England. Shaniah Begum steps through the prison gates for her first day as a correctional officer. Now, this place is known for housing some of the most difficult inmates, and she was now part of a team responsible for maintaining order and safety within its walls. But looks are deceiving because you would think she was a dedicated officer, committed to her responsibilities. But as the months passed on, something was happening that would eventually explode into a full-fledged scandal. Begum's story is a textbook case of how quickly professional boundaries can blur in a prison environment. Because what starts as an innocent interaction with an inmate named Joshua Mullings gradually evolves into something far more complicated and inappropriate. As time goes on, Begum and Mullings develop a connection that went way beyond the usual officer-inmate relationship. They begin looking for opportunities to meet in private, away from the watchful eyes of security cameras and fellow officers. And they found the perfect spot. A storage cupboard tucked away into a quiet corner of the facility. Normally a utility closet, it now became a meeting place for illicit activities. According to court records, the pair would engage in everything from playful flirting to heavy petting and eventually full-on intimate encounters. All while Shaniah was on duty. For a while, they did manage to keep their forbidden relationship a secret. She became skilled at finding excuses to disappear from her post, sometimes ignoring radio calls and remaining unaccounted for extended periods. But in a max security prison where routine and accountability are essential, those absences started raising a few eyebrows amongst her colleagues. In October 2022, suspicions had grown strong enough that prison officials decided to take action. In a move that would prove to be Shaniah's undoing, they installed a hidden camera inside that storage cupboard. And between September 22nd and 28th, this concealed camera captured multiple recordings of Begum and Mullings engaging in various intimate activities, most of which are kinda too graphic to even say here. The footage provides undeniable evidence of a serious breach of professional conduct and a blatant violation of the law, given her position as a public officer. When confronted with all the evidence, Shaniah couldn't deny what was clearly captured on camera. October 3rd, 2022. Begum's arrested and charged with misconduct in public office. When her case eventually came before the Birmingham Crown Court, she pled guilty, acknowledging that there was no defense for what she had done. And the court seemed to agree.
The behavior of Begum clearly erodes the public's trust in her as a prison officer, and she now faces a period of time behind bars.
What's crazy about this one is the little regard she had for the risks she had taken. In a high-security environment where movement is supposed to be monitored and accounted for, that recklessness put not just her career at stake, but the safety of the entire facility. Her defense team attempted to portray her as a victim of manipulation, suggesting that Mullings had emotionally blackmailed her into this relationship. However, the calculated nature of their meetings, her willingness to ignore her duties, and the repeated pattern of encounters painted an entirely different picture, one of an officer who had made a conscious choice to pursue a relationship despite being fully aware of the consequences. So in January 2024, the court hands down its judgment. Shaniah Begum was sentenced to 16 months in prison. How did she manage to disappear for so long without raising immediate alarms? And how many procedural failures need to be addressed? Shaniah's storage closet encounters were caught on camera, but this next officer's phone calls exposed activities she desperately tried to deny. December 17th, 2021, Montgomery County Jail, Conroe, Texas. Prison officials are listening in on calls and are about to stumble on a conversation that would expose one of their own deputies having an affair with an inmate.
I might have given him a look.
In fact, part of decoy.
Charlene Diane O'Banion had built her career as this respected jail deputy. Her job came with significant responsibilities, like overseeing safety and security, maintaining order, and enforcing the strict regulations that keep prisons functioning. She had access to every area of this prison, intimate knowledge of security protocols, and regular interactions with the inmates under her supervision. The bombshell would drop when investigators intercepted a phone call between O'Banion and an inmate by the name of Jacob Parker. It wouldn't be regular small talk. It was pretty intimate, explicit, and leaving little doubt about the nature of their relationship. So when investigators called in O'Banion for questioning, she initially denies anything inappropriate with Parker.
I can either do it like to a search warrant, or you can give consent to search it. It's kind of up to you how you want to do that.
But then they played back the recordings of her own conversations, and her facade quickly crumbled. In these phone calls, they're talking about their encounters in graphic detail, completely contradicting her claims of innocence. The investigation showed a pattern of misconduct that had been unfolding right under everyone's noses. November 2021. O'Banion orchestrated a meeting with Parker in a secluded area of the jail, deliberately chosen to be out of sight from security cameras and other staff. And according to her eventual confession, the two would share a kiss before getting frisky in this hidden corner of the facility.
And we were walking back there, and he leaned in to kiss me, and he just whipped it.
And then I know this is stupid, but it's just the way things work.
What made the situation even worse was how O'Banion manipulated prison operations to create these opportunities. She explained to investigators that a drug-related issue had left an entire housing section without assigned workers. And because of this, jail staff would seek volunteers from other housing units to perform cleaning duties in that section. Parker, being in custody since March 2, 2021, was among these volunteers, giving O'Banion the perfect chance to meet him in this secluded area away from prying eyes.
Where exactly did y'all go?
The hallway in decoy.
Like back towards like 15, 16?
Mm-hmm. And I needed to roll the doors open, so you can go in. So I had the key to unlock that little picket area so that you can roll.
In court, detectives lay out the damning sequence of evidence, supported by O'Banion's own confession. And in the end, O'Banion pled guilty to improper sexual activity with a person in custody, a serious offense under Texas law. The court then sentenced O'Banion to 100 days in jail, a relatively short sentence compared to similar cases, reflecting what some people see as being a disturbing pattern of leniency for offending officers. Whatever the reason for this relatively light punishment, the damage to O'Banion's career and reputation was permanent. While Charlene O'Banion denied everything until confronted with recordings, this next one takes her prison scandal and turns it into an unexpected new career. June 8, 2020. Sydney's Silverwater Correctional Complex, Australia. What began as suspicions about a female prison guard would soon explode into a full-blown scandal.
A prison guard who was held up as the face of corrective services could now find herself behind bars.
Melissa Goodwin built a pretty solid reputation as a dedicated corrections officer at one of Australia's most secure facilities, mind you. And with her professional demeanor and commitment to the job, she seemed like the ideal employee. So it all kind of starts when her colleagues notice her unusual behavior around certain inmates. She was kind of spending too much time with specific prisoners, and the nature of those interactions seemed flirtatious. Eventually, authorities could no longer ignore these signs, and they launch an investigation. Turns out that Goodwin was getting it on with an inmate named Corey London, who was serving time for armed robbery.
It's been going on for several months, since November last year. We have confirmed that there has been correspondence between this female officer and the inmate.
London was considered extremely dangerous, and he was precisely the kind of inmate officers were trained to maintain strict professional boundaries with. The relationship apparently started in prison and then continued afterwards. Digital evidence would paint a pretty damning picture. We have phone records, text messages, and social media all pointing to him having this relationship. When confronted with the evidence, Goodwin's defense team made a surprising argument. They claim she had been emotionally manipulated, portraying London as someone who had preyed on her vulnerabilities. But everyone found that narrative hard to believe, with all the evidence of her willingly maintaining that relationship even after London got out. And what makes the case even more sensational wasn't just how inappropriate everything was. She was also involved with another former inmate, an aspiring rapper named Caleb Valerie. So while she never faced any real consequences because of that relationship, it did become clear that Goodwin had a pattern of inappropriate behavior that was impossible to ignore. The relationship with Valerie eventually takes a violent turn, leading to an altercation. Their public fallout showed just how entangled she had become in the lives of former inmates. The news of Goodwin's misconduct spread quickly through the Australian media, and the public was just shocked that someone entrusted with maintaining order in a prison could just abandon all her professional responsibilities so easily.
Will you ever be mixing business and pleasure again? Out of my face, man.
August 2021. Goodwin was handed a suspended sentence and ordered to complete 100 hours of community service. The light punishment caused some mixed reactions, because some saw it as appropriate for a first offense, while others saw it as a failure to hold public officials accountable for some serious breaches of trust. And after her trial and conviction, Goodwin made an unexpected career shift. Rather than hiding from the spotlight, she bathed in it, turning to bodybuilding and social media. She transformed her image and built a following as a fitness influencer. Now, that dramatic career change had people questioning her actual authenticity as a prison guard in the first place. And for the inmates of this prison, Goodwin's actions had pretty serious implications, too. Her misconduct reinforced negative stereotypes about corrections officers, and it would undermine the authority of her colleagues, who were just trying to maintain basic professional boundaries between themselves and the prisoners they're in charge of. This story is a cautionary tale about the importance of thorough background checks and ongoing supervision for those entrusted with positions of authority. In an age of social media influencers, perhaps greater scrutiny is needed for those who seek careers in fields that demand the highest level of professional conduct and discretion. Miami, Florida, 1993. The prosecutors thought they had an airtight case against one of the most notorious drug lords in history, Griselda Blanco, the cocaine godmother herself. Their star witness was a man by the name of Jorge Ayala, Blanco's former hitman, who seemed more than willing to spill all the details of her drug empire. But what they didn't count on was Ayala's irresistible charm working its magic from behind prison walls, setting off a scandal that would derail the entire case.
Inconceivable to me, but apparently they happen.
I never really had a heart-to-heart discussion with him. It's how you could do something so incredibly stupid to totally fuck up a good prosecution.
Born in Cali, Colombia in 1957, Jorge was unlike many of his peers. He grows up in Chicago after his family immigrated to the U.S. when he was just a kid. His father found legitimate work at General Motors, and for a brief time, young Jorge would follow in his footsteps as a mechanic. But that straight life wasn't enough for Ayala. Even in those early days, he liked to make some extra money on the side by smuggling immigrants into the U.S., and it wouldn't be long before he graduated to more serious contraband. 1979, Ayala takes a job transporting a truckload of guns from Chicago to Miami. But when he arrived in the city, he decided to stay, and the timing couldn't have been better. Miami's drug scene was exploding, and endless opportunities started popping up left and right. Ayala started small, working as a bodyguard and debt collector. But his talents soon caught the eye of Griselda Blanco, one of the deadliest figures in the Colombian cocaine trade. Blanco looked at Ayala and saw this cold, calculated killer with an astonishing amount of charisma and a perfect command of English. He could blend in seamlessly in American society, making him the ideal hitman. Together, the two would form a partnership that would leave a trail of bodies across Miami. 1982. When a drug-dealing couple named Alfredo and Grisel Lorenzo failed to pay for a drug shipment, Blanco decided they needed to be eliminated. Ayala ended up shooting the couple in their South Miami home, while their 3 children watched TV in the other room.
This was another level of killing that cannot be explained by anything I think in her background. I think it's something in her soul. She was a born criminal.
But despite all this, Ayala occasionally tried to temper Blanco's excessive violence. He would warn her many times that she was drawing too much attention to herself. One such incident occurred when Blanco ordered him to kill someone inside a crowded club. Ayala took an ice pick with him and entered this elevator with his target, fully prepared to strike. But when a cop unexpectedly joined him, Ayala abandoned the mission. When he reported back to Blanco, she went crazy and demanded that he grab a machine gun from his trunk, go back to the club, and open fire on everyone inside. Well, that day, Ayala managed to talk her down from this plan. Instead, he followed the target after they left the club and just shot him along the highway, though an innocent bystander did lose his life in the process. February 17, 1985. The cops caught up with Blanco, and she was sentenced to nearly 2 decades in prison on drug trafficking charges. By that point, law enforcement had already heard rumors about her hitman, but they knew him through a different name. So after Ayala gets arrested for robbing a bank in Chicago, investigators put together the puzzle and find out this guy is Reevy. 1993, Ayala was facing the death penalty for multiple murders, and so he decided to strike a deal with prosecutors. He would testify against Blanco in exchange for his life. His detailed testimony painted a damning picture of Blanco's empire, potentially setting her up for a death sentence. But this is where the story takes an unexpected turn. 1998, while awaiting his chance to testify, investigators found that Ayala had been engaging in inappropriate phone calls with not just one, but 3 secretaries at the Miami-Dade State Attorney's Office. Now, these weren't just flirtatious conversations. Ayala was exchanging explicit photographs with these women, and he would even send money and gifts to them from behind bars. The scandal would explode into headlines, and all 3 secretaries were fired, despite one making the claim that she had been instructed by a prosecutor to flirt with Ayala. Now, the investigation completely ruined his credibility as a witness and destroyed prosecutors' hopes of using his testimony against Blanco.
Riverita created the case and destroyed the case. I don't know, maybe he did it on purpose.
But perhaps the worst consequence was that instead of facing additional murder charges that would have led to a death sentence, Blanco was able to strike a plea deal, and she was eventually deported back to Colombia in 2004, managing to survive another 8 years before meeting her own violent end, gunned down outside a butcher shop in Medellin in 2012. And as for Ayala, he was given life in prison with the possibility of parole after 25 years. He repeatedly appealed for a reduced sentence, but so far those pleas have fallen on deaf ears. If he's ever released, he too would be deported back to Colombia, a country he barely knows, but where his reputation certainly precedes him.